Global supply chains are being weaponized. That's a warning coming out of the European Commission, as the Europeans are feeling the brunt of that. Nexperia, a Chinese-owned chip manufacturer, no longer wants to supply much-needed chips for European industry. I speak to Lars-Hendrik Röller. He's the former economic advisor to former Chancellor Angela Merkel and the founder of the Berlin Global Dialogue.
She's right. I think we're a new world order where dependencies are being weaponized, also economic dependencies are being weaponized. And she was also alluding to the rare earth part, to Chinese having a strong control over that, and that we need to protect ourselves. And she announced an action plan or an agenda to basically reduce that dependency on rare earth. And I think this is a good point. I mean, we had the experience in the Ukraine with the Russian gas dependency. We're also very dependent on the United States. By the way, not only on China, in many other areas, including also national security. So we need to do more on that. So I think in all of those areas, the New World Order means that we have to do more. But on the other hand, and this is the point of this conference, the world is a lot of interdependent. For example, a German car, a Mercedes car, Ola Källenius said that it's not a German car. There's no such thing as a German car. It is networked all over the world. Trade is all over the world. So the important part is going to be for that vision which President von der Leyen outlined, is to get the right balance between protecting our legitimate interests, so we cannot be extorted, and keeping markets open so that the economic efficiency and the interdependence, which is responsible for a lot of the growth in the world, doesn't get killed by it.
That's what political leaders and business leaders have been speaking about at this conference where we're recording this. At the same time, first you need to live to see another day, and that is an acute standoff that we're seeing between China and the Europeans. So what would you see as a step out of that?
Well, there are immediate cases, and I think there's a debate in terms of rare earth, of doing something to reduce the dependency. For example, developing more of our own, creating more stockpiling in Europe, and this is exactly what we're doing to basically solve acute situations. But there's a general policy question. How far do we want to go isolating ourselves from the rest of the world in the name of sovereignty and independence? And my point is only that we should be careful. We should be very strategic and selective, because in German you say, du sägst den Ast ab, auf dem du sitzt. I mean, we depend on that. Our welfare and our social welfare system will depend on that. So I think it is very smart to do this. We need to be very selective, or we need to decide which areas we're doing this. But I think there's the other side, which President von der Leyen also mentioned, which is more the offensive than the defensive side, and that is diversifying trade agreements with other countries. She mentioned the trade agreement with India. We had the Indian economics minister here. So rather opening markets and increasing trade rather than developing it independently at home.
Now, you used to be the person who got tasked with solving acute situations like this standoff over the Dutch company that is essentially now a Chinese-owned company, Nexperia. At the same time, we just saw the German foreign minister cancel a scheduled trip to China. The official reason given was that he didn't get the appointments beyond his counterpart, the Chinese foreign minister Wang Yi, that he required to tackle some key issues. So what is going on there? How do you read this?
Well, it doesn't sound very good, because it can easily escalate. So when you're in a situation like that, and there have been many similar situations, as you were saying in the past, that the question is, do you try to dialogue and try to find a compromise, or do you react and be tough? Same thing with tariffs in the trade negotiations with the United States. With the possibility of the whole thing escalating. And if everything escalates, in the end, nobody wins. But if you don't escalate, they will take advantage of you. So the trick is going to be, so on that China situation, I think it's true, it's correct that the German foreign minister is trying to talk to his counterpart. Counterpart doesn't give an appointment, then there may be other ways of dealing with. So there are many channels which you can do, maybe a lower level, but you should try to solve the problem. Try to understand also why they're doing it. because there are reasons of why they're doing it, and some of them we will not accept, and some of them might be actually legitimate. So I think this is very important to also try to understand why the other person is doing it. But if that doesn't work, and also that's what Commissioner von der Leyen has been, President von der Leyen has been saying, you need to have instruments at the end to be credible in this bargaining situation, and you cannot be afraid not to pull them. And this is a difficult situation when you're sitting there in power and you have to make that decision. Do you escalate, or do you actually put out some of these things or not? Because when it goes bad and escalates, then you're holding the responsibility. So what I found out was very interesting. When you're in the Chancellery, it's a very difficult trade-off to make, because the consequences of it going bad is going to be rather negative for the German economy, let's say, or German society as a whole. Whereas when you're outside, it is much easier to actually call for, let's be tough, let's react. But I think it's, I think overall, and I think this is also what the speech of President von der Leyen says, in many of these issues, I think also applies to the transatlantic relationship, where we signed a deal in the end, which has been criticized. In the end, I think Europeans, if they are united, it's big if they are united on these issues, I think we should be more forceful in the new geopolitical world where weaponization of these things occur, to use the instruments we actually legally have.
And you used to solve these issues while the United States was still pretty much aligned with the Europeans when it came to these kinds of issues. They were...
Well, no, I mean, Trump won.
Yeah.
I was there during Trump won. It's a different world.
Yes.
Shouldn't compare it, but of course, the signs on the horizon were there. He had a very different team at the time. Now it is much more direct and difficult for us sometimes to deal with. The Biden administration on economic issues actually followed many of the issues which Trump had. The tariffs were not taken back, but they had a very different approach. Trump is more transactional, and so I think we've always had that issue. I remember under Trump 1, we had the threat of auto tariffs. We ended up with steel and aluminum tariffs, which were not taken back by Biden, by the way. They're still there now. But auto tariffs were threatened, I think, of 20%. And the question is, how do we react to that? Should we impose counter tariffs, or do we try to negotiate with them? And at the time, we settled it. I remember that Jean-Claude Juncker was the Commission president at the time. He went there, he did a deal. I think on soybeans, he bought a lot of soybeans from the United States, and in the end the auto tariffs didn't come. So we managed to get it done. But if you escalate on autos, you may want to do that, and I think you have to think carefully if you do. It's a rather dramatic situation for Germany, because I mean the automobile industry is, when you look at the data and the numbers, and of course they have challenges, not only tariffs, they have also
still the biggest employer.
tariffs,
Yes.
Still the biggest employer. You need to be mindful of the consequences of that. And so it's always better to get dialogue and get a settlement. And this is why I think the Commission, I think the German government was also very supportive of that deal. Yeah, it's a deal, it's not a full settled agreement. And let's hope it stands up, because it's not a legal text, it's just an MOU in some sense. But the German government and the Commission went for that deal rather than escalating. But it's a trade-off.
Now there are tariffs on European cars. There's discussion of rolling back the target of phasing out combustion engines,
Yes.
and Volkswagen is potentially only 2 weeks away from not being able to continue production because of that chip standoff with China. If you look into the toolbox that would now be available, what is there, and what would you pull at this time?
Well, I think they have an automobile summit, and you would look at it and you try to help them also the whole transition which they need to do. I think on the tariffs, they managed to get, I think the 27.5 tariffs are now, I think 15% tariffs, so it's a little lower. We heard yesterday Ola Källenius saying even 15%, given our margins on certain cars, it's a lot.
Yeah.
And then on top of it, you have that big crisis with the chips. We had that during the pandemic, and then again, there was not that much we could do. I mean, you can try to get chips from other places. The international competition picks up where Europe tries to get chips from other countries, and you try to help them with that. So I think and then, of course, the automobile industry is generally under pressure from competition from China. In the electric vehicle market, we're losing our market share. So I think there's a number of issues you need to do. But I think when we're going back to the trade issue, I think what we have done is we have about a 15% tariff. They have no tariffs on their products in this deal, the Americans. And I think what is important now there is not to reopen that and try to escalate and let it fall apart. I think it's not a perfect agreement for Europe, but it is an agreement. And focus more on the other issues. Now we have the 15% tariffs, but let's focus on, increasing the efficiency and the productivity and the transformation of the digitalization of the. So I think in the end, rather than blaming others for doing bad things to us, which we should fight and complain and be tough or not be tough, a lot of it is actually homeworks in Germany, and we have all the cards in our hands. And if we, for example, speed, and if we deregulate, and if we set the right incentives, you mentioned the combustible engine, there's a big debate. Do you need that? Don't you need the climate neutrality, which in Germany is 1945, in Europe it's 2045, in Europe it is 2050. I think we have homegrown problems, and this was another thing coming out here, which I like, is that these external, we have like two wars, if you want, one trade war and one horrible physical war, actually help us doing the things which we should do anyways. And I think that's also on the defense side and the security side. So we need to do our homeworks at home, and this was also what President von der Leyen today emphasized.
Another issue that was mentioned here a lot was the mindset issue in Europe, and the German chancellor went on the record just a couple of days ago saying that he feels that he basically declared that the rules-based international order is suspended for now. Do you think it was the right time to say that? And do you agree with that assessment?
I think it's not a 0-1 thing. I think we were never always rules-based, and we're not totally not rules. I think 72% of trade still occurs today under WTO rules. So it's just not, so we still have, and the question is really, should we dismantle it further or redefine it? What kind of architecture of the rules-based do you want? And we discussed this also at the Berlin Global Dialogue. And I'm for keeping as much multilateralism as possible, knowing very well that in certain areas it's going to be impossible. So I think this is, and I think on the mindset, the second thing your issue, but the question is mindset of whom? Look, having been in government for 10 years, I don't really believe that it's the politicians' fault only that we are where we are. You can blame them for not having vision or not taking good decisions earlier and all of that, and you should. And there's some, there's some, of course, some element to that. But I actually think that what we need is in the whole society, also the voters, need to basically have an understanding that these things are necessary. Of course, you can argue politicians need to communicate, or the media needs to communicate, but I feel like many of the reforms which are happening now, like less regulation, speed, even investment on defense, this is not new. This is something which we're discussing for many years. But it's just very difficult to do in an environment where the German economy is doing very well, because you need to convince the people that this is really necessary to do. So I think it's in a way in a democracy more than in China, where the government can do whatever they want, at least for certain, unless there's a revolution or something. Here, you need to convince the people and the voters. And I remember Fridays for Futures. This was bottom up. It had a huge impact on Germany's position in the field of climate change. So what I'm saying is that if you think about the mindset, it's not just the mindset of a leader or a group of people. They're also important. But it's really the mindset of the society and the voters. Because if they change their mind and if they don't vote for radical parties, which would be catastrophe and would actually achieve the opposite, but they're free to vote for whoever they want to, but they sort of support positions which recognize that Europe needs to be more competitive, let's say, or be more fair, or whatever you have, then the politicians will do it. And that's where the media is also very important.
Well, with that homework, Lars-Hendrik Röller,
Yes.
founder
Thank you.
and director of the Berlin Global Dialogue and former economic advisor to the former Chancellor Angela Merkel. Thank you so much.